Attachment to a way of being perpetuates patterns. When there is a scenario, an experience, a relationship that seems to show up again and again in our lives, even if the masks change, then on some level, we might become aware that there is an attachment to all or part of the pattern that is being perpetuated. This might be a very intense understanding to hear, because many times when we arrive at this kind of juncture, there's a certain pattern that we don't want to perpetuate, at least on the conscious level. So it can be a lot to hear that on some level there is a vote to perpetuate something that would otherwise seem to be super disharmonious for us. But in this video, I'm going to share with you some of the ways that you can not only come to more understanding within yourself and the parts of yourself that seem to be sabotaging, but also to step into the awareness of what patterns you can shift from this point forward, thanks to this new perspective. I'm Danielle Lynn. I talk with deliberate creators, alchemists, and all around cool people, such as yourself. In the video conversations I hold, me, you, and our friends, remember new perspectives that we can consider for our reality. Remember, from my perspective, it's up to each of us to discern and choose what is resonant for ourselves. Because the way I experience reality, only each of us in our awareness can really know what is the path and the resonant step for us. So, today's conversation about perpetuating patterns. I like the alliteration on that one. Is that alliteration? Perhaps. Perpetuating patterns, as mentioned, are often rooted in an attachment to a way of being. So, what do I mean by this? Let's say there's a relationship pattern, a pattern of a kind of relationship you find yourself getting into again and again. And there are certain things about this patterning that you can observe in hindsight, but when you're in the middle of the relationship or situation, you might not see it as clearly. And yet, with each relationship or cycle that is complete, you suddenly look back on it and you might say to yourself, why do I keep choosing the same people? Or why do I keep having the same thing play out? The answer is often in an unconscious set of beliefs, systems, or structures that you are currently running on. They can also come from conscious beliefs that you're aware of, but you may not know how to shift currently. That's okay. Whichever one they are, what we're about to do is we're about to be a little playful and curious with some of these belief structures or patterns. If you like, we can walk through it right now in real time. All right. So you can do this with a relationship pattern, or you can do this with just any pattern that you play out. Maybe it's a pattern of choices. Maybe it's how you choose friendships, or you choose business situations, or you just make choices in your life. So pull up one that you would like to explore right now within this video conversation. All right. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to be aware that there is some kind of pattern that we've just identified. Okay. We don't need to know the full details of it just yet. We're simply being aware that there is a pattern. One of the first things to do right here, be aware of and acknowledge if there is any shame, blame, guilt, feelings of resistance, feelings of negativity. We're not trying to change them. We're just being aware of them. See, what's happening right here is oftentimes when we feel fear, shame, blame, guilt, especially when it's from something within, like a memory or perspective, There is often a part of ourselves that is attempting to guard or shield another part. So it's kind of like a part of our psyche is attempting to shield us from uncomfortable perspectives, uncomfortable ideas, uncomfortable truths. Oftentimes, when there's something we don't want to look at or we feel we don't know how to handle, we will pass it off. We'll shove it down into our subconscious, the lower conscious self, and basically say, like, keep this from me at all costs. And this is why, this is often, well, we'll say it this way, this is often the source of really otherwise confusing self-sabotaging behavior, because then our conscious self might say something like, yeah, I want to have this kind of relationship. But if that kind of relationship triggers an area that might come up against something you don't want to look at, then there's going to be a part of you that goes, nope, nope, we got to protect that part of ourselves. We said we're not going to be looking at that. And so then that subconscious part of you will somehow, some way, somehow create disturbance in the experience to help protect you from continuing on it if it perceives that it's going to be a threat to this other inner part that you assigned it to protect on some level. Do you follow that map? Anytime we feel fear or discomfort in ourselves, I find, in any case, that it's often an invitation to be very curious, very kind, and it's often an opportunity to deeper truth, to something within ourselves that it itself has fear of revealing to us. On some level, lack of clarity could be seen as a desire to keep oneself safe from knowingness. Because sometimes knowingness involves unknowingness. Seems like a paradox, right? Sometimes what there is to know is that you don't know. And to embrace the not knowing and embrace the discomfort is a practice that allows us to let go of creating very limiting structures of what we do know and opens us up to possible more resonant perspectives, ways of living and ways of looking at things that we don't know that we don't know. If on some level we have challenges with inner capacity, like if we feel that we are already maxed out, we don't feel that we're very well equipped to handle where we're at currently or handle certain situations, the inner self may work very, very hard to protect you from experiencing those situations, including to shut down your system if you're going to potentially explore a new path, to create lack of clarity, to do things to attempt to keep you safe. The perspective I'm offering here, though, is this isn't a bad part of you. I don't even necessarily look at these things as good or bad. But I'm going to offer to you that this is simply a part of you that is doing the job that it thinks is going to be of assistance to you. And what we have the opportunity to do when we then register fear or unknowing or discomfort is we have the opportunity to be curious within ourselves and go, what is the thought, what is the belief that I would need to have in order for this experience, being uncomfortable, being fearful, be true for me? So in a sense, you're asking yourself, what do I believe needs to be true? And hand in hand with that comes a willingness to then feel the discomfort. Because while this is expressed as sort of a thought, a rationalization, my experience is that the real embodiment comes from releasing the need to think everything through and simply be in the presence of the feeling. Because when you're in the presence, you start receiving new information. It can be challenging for the brain because sometimes the brain doesn't know how to immediately translate or process the information you're receiving. And so it might attempt to overclock. Instead, what I find is very helpful and resonant is when I experience this, when I experience a feeling that might seem disharmonious, I can give myself permission to breathe and then say, I trust myself. What's up? And then as I listen, as I genuinely listen, not just with my ears, not with my thoughts, but I am sensing, I'm just being very present. And I'm not attempting to solve anything. I'm just listening. I'm just hearing what's up. When I do this, what often happens is one of a few things. Sometimes the feeling, the emotion simply passes through. All right, nothing to process. Sometimes some information, idea, thought comes through, and I sit with it. I don't over-identify with what comes through, but I am aware, and I'm being present with it, and I'm looking, and I'm curious. And then sometimes there is an invitation to really acknowledge and feel something, maybe a deep pain or a sadness or a sorrow, and I could feel I'm just being invited to cry, to shake, to just experience, because there was something so profoundly touched within me that it wants to express and experience. And so I do. And regardless of the path that you might choose, what happens is your inner self, the parts of your inner self that communicate with all of you, develop a more easy language to communicate between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind and your higher conscious mind. Essentially, you're encouraging the pathways of communication and information between all aspects of yourself. But part of this is really rooted in genuinely working with yourself as a team. That might sound like a funny perspective, yourself as a team, but very paradoxically, we are one, but there are also many aspects to our energy, to ourself, and to our embodiment as these beings. So the more I find that I cultivate harmonious relationships within myself, the more easeful it is for me to communicate within myself and understand the different information I'm receiving, whether it's thoughts, whether it's emotions, whether it's insights, and I'm able to translate them into ways that are clear, decisive, actionable, loving, healthy, nourishing. And as a result, I'm able to be more present in the moment. A lot of times when we have a challenge being present, there may be something that wants to be seen or acknowledged. And if we are present, it's almost like there's all that there is to see and acknowledge it. And so people might distract themselves temporarily by being very busy or being in their heads or disassociating or meditating or doing any number of things. It's not to say that those things are unhealthy to do. Sometimes people can find unhealthy ways of doing things that are in and of themselves neutral. So now that you've identified this pattern and you've given yourself permission to observe it without judgment, without shame, blame, or guilt, the next step is to be curious about it. Be curious. How do I believe this serves me? Is the curiosity. You ask that because on some level you believe it serves you. In some of the other explanations that I've shared before, I share how the unconscious parts of yourself that appear to be working in disharmony with you are actually following instructions to protect or guide or support a part of yourself that on some level you believe needs it. So opening up the field of communication between you and yourself and learning, remembering perhaps non-shame, non-judgment, and instead upgrading to the field of curiosity can be great tools to help you interface with sometimes these seeming more tender parts of self. And as you do this, as you allow yourself to connect with yourself and within yourself, you may start to experience more spaciousness within your heart, within your mind, more room to consider things where you might once have felt pressured. Because a lot of times, or at least in all the times I experience, the pressure always comes from within. Even if we are in a dire situation, we may act with simply decisiveness and movement. Pressure is built on a perception that comes from within. And so, as you hold this space within yourself, and as you're present and curious with your patterns, you may start to see them in new ways. Almost like if you were looking at a picture and you suddenly noticed it was an optical illusion and there was more than one ways to see it. And what this does is it gives you an opportunity to start to get clear within yourself what actually is true and resonant. What is your response ability, and what is something you may have been perpetuating out of temporary unconsciousness about a matter. And in such a way, you may find a deeper field of support within yourself that naturally guides you to the pathways to make new patterns. Because the key I found is we don't actually have to undo patterns. You just start making new, consistent choices from here forward. Thank you for today's conversation. I have some links in the description and a link to the Alchemy Lab as well, if you'd like to go deeper into community. In all cases, I deeply appreciate our time together, and I look forward to talking soon.